I lied to my son about the fastest plane I ever flew. For 40 years, I told
Ready
him
for
it was the
takeoff. Let's
Mustang.
show them what we...
The P-51, silver and sleek, with that Packard Merlin engine that could push you past 400 miles an hour if you had the altitude and the guts. I told him about dogfights over Germany, about chasing Messerschmitts through cloud banks, about the sound of 650 caliber machine guns shaking the whole airframe when you squeeze the trigger. Every word was true, but the answer was a lie. The fastest fighter I ever witnessed was not American, and the man who flew it, the best pilot I ever knew, died in 1982, believing he had failed. My name is James Reynolds, Captain United States Army Air Forces, retired. I am 65 years old, and I am sitting in my garage in Oklahoma City on a Tuesday afternoon in August of 1985, holding a photograph that nobody has seen in 40 years. The photograph shows 5 young men standing in front of an aircraft. The plane behind them has an aggressive nose, a bubble canopy, wings that look wrong, somehow too thin, too sharp. None of the graceful curves you expect from a Spitfire. This is something different, something harder. The man in the center of the photograph is Squadron Leader Jeffrey Mitchell, Royal Air Force. He is 23 years old in this picture. His leather jacket hangs open over his uniform. His face is turned slightly toward the camera, and he is smiling, but there is something in his eyes that the camera caught. Something tired. Something that understood what was coming. I am standing to his left, looking younger than I remember being. 25 years old, American uniform captains, bars still shiny and new. My hand is raised in a casual wave, frozen mid-motion by the shutter. The date written on the back of the photograph is March 16th, 1945. One day after Jeffrey Mitchell flew 483 miles per hour in level flight at 21,000 feet. One day after he set a record that would never be broken. One day after he landed, that aircraft climbed out of the cockpit, took 3 steps across the tarmac, and collapsed to his knees, crying like his heart was broken. I have never told anyone why he cried. Not my wife, not my children, not the reporters who occasionally call asking about the war years. I made a promise to Jeffrey and I kept it. But Jeffrey is gone now, 3 years in the ground, and the promise is starting to feel less like loyalty and more like cowardice. My son found me in the garage an hour ago. He is 38 years old, a lawyer, successful, lives in Dallas with his wife and 2 daughters. He comes home to visit maybe twice a year, and when he does, he always asks about the war. Today he asked the question I've been dreading. Dad, he said, was the P-51 Mustang really the fastest fighter of World War II? I looked at him. I looked at the photograph in my hand, the one I had just pulled from the bottom of an old footlocker I have not opened since 1970. I looked at Jeffrey Mitchell, frozen at 23, smiling that tired smile. No, I told my son, it was not. He looked confused. I had spent his entire childhood telling him stories about the Mustang, about American engineering, about how we built the best fighters, the fastest bombers, how our technology won the war. Then what was he asked? I showed him the photograph. He squinted at it, trying to make sense of the aircraft in the background. What is that, he asked. That, I said, is a Supermarine Spiteful. British. March 1945. 483 miles per hour in level flight at 21,000 feet. Fastest piston engine fighter ever recorded during the war. My son stared at the photo. I could see him trying to reconcile this with everything he thought he knew. I have never heard of it, he said. I know, I told him. That is the point. Let me take you back. Let me show you how a farm boy from Oklahoma ended up standing on a British airfield watching the fastest fighter plane in the world break a record that nobody wanted. I was born in 1920 in a town so small it does not appear on most maps. Farming country, Dust Bowl country. My father worked land that fought back against every seed, every drop of water, every hour of labor. I grew up watching him lose that fight year after year. When I was 12 years old, a barnstormer came through town. Some old Great War pilot with a Jenny biplane held together with wire and prayer. He was charging $2 for a 10-minute flight. My father said it was a waste of money. I saved up for 6 months doing odd jobs, walked into town with $2 in quarters and dimes, and went up. 10 minutes. That was all it took. 10 minutes above the dead brown earth, above the dust, above the endless flat horizon. When we landed, I knew. I knew the way some men know they are meant to be doctors or priests or musicians. I was meant to fly. By 1941, I was 21 years old and working as a crop duster, flying a beat-up Stearman over other men's failing farms, trying to save harvests that could not be saved. Then came December 7th, Pearl Harbor. I enlisted the next morning. They sent me to flight training in Texas. I was good, better than good. I had logged more hours in that crop duster than most of the instructors had in their entire careers. By early 1943, I was flying P-51 Mustangs out of an airfield in England, escorting B-17 bombers deep into Germany. 15 missions. I flew 15 combat missions between January and June of 1943. Shot down 2 Messerschmitts, probably damaged a third. Watched 3 of my squadron mates go down in flames. Learned that being fast mattered less than being smart, and being smart mattered less than being lucky. On June 12, 1943, I was called into the squadron commander's office. There was a man there I had never seen before. Civilian clothes, British accent, clipboard full of papers. His name was Edward Donaldson. Wing Commander Edward Donaldson, though he did not use the rank that day. Captain Reynolds, he said, we have a proposal for you. The proposal was simple. The British had a facility called the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment at a place called Boscombe Down. AEE, they called it. It was where they tested everything. New aircraft, new weapons, new engines. Every prototype, every modification, every theory about how to make a fighter fly faster or turn tighter or climb higher. The Americans wanted to learn British testing methods. The British wanted American observers who understood combat flying, not just theory. They needed pilots who had been shot at, who had seen what worked and what did not when someone was trying to kill you at 400 miles an hour. You would be a liaison, Donaldson explained. You would observe our testing procedures. You would fly when appropriate. You would report back to your superiors on our methods and findings. You would help us understand the American perspective, and we would help you understand ours. When do I start, I asked. July 1st, he said. 3 weeks later, I was standing on the tarmac at Boscombe Down Royal Air Force Station, watching a Spitfire Mark V land, with the kind of grace that made you understand why men wrote poems about that airplane. The pilot who climbed out was younger than me, maybe 21, maybe 22. Leather jacket, silk scarf, the whole romantic image. He pulled off his helmet and ran a hand through dark hair that was plastered to his skull with sweat despite the cool English morning. You must be the American, he said. His accent was pure public school, the kind of voice you heard in newsreels talking about duty and empire. Captain James Reynolds, I said, offering my hand. He shook it. Squadron Leader Jeffrey Mitchell. Everyone calls me Jeff. Welcome to Boscombe Down. I hope you are ready to have everything you think you know about flying proven wrong. I smiled. I had been flying since I was 12 years old. I had logged over 1,000 hours. I had fought and survived in combat. I thought I knew plenty. Try me, I said. The facility at Boscombe Down was not what I expected. I had pictured something rough, temporary, thrown together in a hurry the way everything in wartime gets thrown together. Instead, I found permanent buildings, paved runways, hangars big enough to hold a dozen aircraft each. This was not a frontline airfield. This was a laboratory. Wing Commander Edward Donaldson ran the flight testing division. He was older than most of the pilots, maybe 35, with the kind of quiet authority that comes from knowing more than everyone else in the room and not needing to prove it. He had flown in the Battle of Britain. He had test flown almost every major British fighter variant since 1939. When he talked about aircraft performance, men listened. He found me on my second day standing outside one of the hangars, watching ground crew work on what looked like a modified Typhoon. Captain Reynolds, he said, walk with me. We walked along the flight line. The morning was cool and gray, typical English summer weather. I could see 3 different aircraft types on the tarmac. A Spitfire, a Hurricane, something I did not recognize. What do you think makes an airplane fast? Donaldson asked. I had not expected a quiz. I thought about it. Engine power, I said. Horsepower, yes, he said. What else? Wait, I suggested. Lighter aircraft, more speed. True, he said. What else? I was running out of answers. Design aerodynamics, altitude, he said. That is what most people miss. Speed is not just power and weight and shape. Speed is altitude. Every aircraft has a performance envelope, a specific altitude where it performs best. A fighter that does 400 miles an hour at 20,000 feet might only do 350 at 10,000. Context matters. Conditions matter. He stopped walking and turned to face me. We are going to test a lot of aircraft here, Captain. British aircraft, American aircraft, captured German aircraft. We are going to push them to their limits and document everything. Speed, climb rate, turn radius, dive characteristics. Ceiling, and every single number we record will include the altitude and atmospheric conditions, because without that context, the numbers are meaningless. He paused. Your P-51 Mustang, beautiful aircraft, fast, 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. That is the number, yes. Yes, sir, I said. Do you know how fast a Spitfire Mark V goes, he asked. I had heard numbers. 370, maybe 380. 369 miles per hour, Donaldson said. At 19,500 feet, 68 miles per hour slower than your Mustang. The Spitfire is outclassed, obsolete, destined for the scrapyard. Yes, I did not answer. It felt like a trap. Except Donaldson continued, that number is for the Mark V. The early war model. We have been improving the Spitfire continuously since 1939. The Mark IX does 404 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. The Mark XIV with a Griffin engine instead of a Merlin does 449 at 24,500. The Mark 21 does 454 at 26,000. He let that sink in. Your Mustang is very fast, Captain, but it is not the fastest. And by the time this war ends, it will not even be close. I felt something shift in my understanding. I had assumed American aircraft were the best. We had the industrial capacity, the resources, the engineering talent. Of course we built the fastest fighters. Donaldson smiled, reading my expression. This is not a competition, he said, not between allies. We are all trying to solve the same problem, which is how to kill the enemy before he kills us. The British approach, the American approach, the Russian approach, they are all valid. But you need to understand that fast is not a simple concept. Fast is a test condition. It is altitude plus power plus atmospheric pressure plus a dozen other variables. And the fastest aircraft in one condition might be mediocre in another. He started walking again. Come, he said. Let me introduce you to your mentor. We found Jeffrey Mitchell in one of the briefing rooms studying performance charts spread across a large table. He looked up when we entered. Squadron Leader Donaldson said, this is Captain Reynolds. He will be shadowing you for the next few months. Teach him how we do things here. Jeffrey stood and offered his hand again. Pleasure, Captain. I hope you are a quick study. Do my best, I said. Donaldson left us alone. Jeffrey gestured to the charts. We are testing a new variant next week, he said. Hawker Tempest Mark II, upgraded engine modified wing. On paper, it should be faster than anything we have flown. In practice, we will see. What do you think, I asked? Jeffrey shrugged. I think paper is where theories live and die. The air is where truth lives. We will put it up, push it to maximum level flight speed at various altitudes and see what it actually does. Then we will know. He rolled up the charts, but first he said we need to establish baselines. You need to fly what we fly so you understand what we are comparing against. How much time do you have in Spitfires? None, I admitted. Jeffrey smiled. Well then, tomorrow morning, 0700, we fix that. That night I lay in my quarters thinking about what Donaldson had said. Fast is a test condition. It seemed obvious once you heard it, but I had never thought about it that way. In combat, you did not have time to think about optimal altitude for maximum speed. You fought where the enemy was at whatever altitude the fight happened. But testing was different. Testing was about understanding limits, about documenting what an aircraft could do under specific controlled conditions, about building knowledge that could be used to design better aircraft, train better pilots, win more fights. I thought about the Mustang. I had loved that airplane. Still did. It had kept me alive through 15 missions. But now I was being asked to set aside loyalty, set aside national pride, and look at aircraft performance objectively, as data, as science. It felt like a betrayal. It also felt necessary. The next morning, Jeffrey took me through pre-flight on a Spitfire Mark IX. It was beautiful, no question. Elliptical wings, inline engine, That distinctive shape that even ground crew who had never flown could recognize instantly. She handles like a dream, Jeffrey said as we walked around the aircraft. Responsive, forgiving, honest. The Merlin engine is reliable. The visibility is excellent once you are airborne. She will turn inside almost anything the Germans have. What about speed, I asked. Jeffrey patted the fuselage. 404 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. Not the fastest thing in the sky, but fast enough. And spot is not everything, Captain. This aircraft won the Battle of Britain, not because it was fastest, but because it was good enough in every category that mattered. We climbed in. Jeffrey gave me the rear seat, took the front himself. The engine started with that characteristic Merlin sound, smooth and powerful. We taxied out, got clearance, and took off. Flying the Spitfire was different from flying the Mustang. Lighter, more nimble. The Mustang felt like a racehorse, powerful and direct. The Spitfire felt like a dancer. Every input translated immediately to motion. The turn radius was tighter than anything I had flown. We climbed to 15,000 feet. Jeffrey's voice came through the intercom. Your airplane captain, take her up to 21,000 and let us see what she can do. I pushed the throttle forward and pulled into a climb. The Spitfire responded beautifully, climbing smoothly through thin clouds. At 21,000 feet, I leveled off and pushed for maximum speed. The airspeed indicator climbed. 370, 380, 390, 400. It settled around 404 miles per hour, exactly as advertised. Not bad, Jeffrey said. But wait until you fly the Mark 14. Griffin engine, 49% more horsepower, completely different beast. We flew for another hour running through various maneuvers, getting a feel for the aircraft's characteristics. When we landed, I had a new respect for British engineering. The Spitfire might not be the fastest, but it was a magnificent piece of machinery. Jeffrey caught me looking at the aircraft as we walked away. Beautiful is she not, he said. She is, I agreed. And she will be obsolete in 2 years, Jeffrey said quietly. Everything we are flying now will be obsolete. Jets are coming, rockets, guided missiles. This whole world of piston engines and propellers, it is ending. We are testing the last generation of fighters that will ever matter. There was something in his voice, not quite sadness, but close. Pride mixed with melancholy. That is why we have to get it right, he continued. Document everything. Understand everything. Because once it is gone forever, and the only thing left will be the records we keep. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the rhythm of Boscombe down. Mornings were briefings and flight planning. Afternoons were testing. Evenings were data analysis and report writing. It was methodical, scientific, completely different from combat flying. Jeffrey and I flew together often. He was an excellent pilot and a good teacher. Patient, thorough, willing to explain not just what to do, but why. We tested Spitfire variants, Hurricanes, a captured Messerschmitt that had been forced down mostly intact. And we talked. Long conversations in the mess hall and the briefing rooms during the long English twilights, when the sun would not set until after 10 at night. We talked about flying, about the war, about what we would do when it ended. Jeffrey wanted to continue test flying if possible. I was not sure. Part of me wanted to go home, get back to normal life. Part of me knew normal life would feel impossibly small after this. One evening in late August, we were sitting outside the officers' mess drinking tea in the cooling air. Jeffrey had been quiet all day, distracted. Do you ever think we are wasting our time? He asked suddenly. I looked at him. What do you mean all this testing? He said. All these incremental improvements. 49 miles per hour faster, better climb rate, tighter turn radius. Does any of it matter? The war is going to be won or lost by industrial capacity and logistics, not by whether our fighters can do 450 instead of 400. I thought about that. You do not believe in what we are doing here. I believe in understanding, Jeffrey said. I believe in knowledge. But sometimes I wonder if we are documenting progress or just documenting the end. Every new aircraft we test is evidence that the old ones are insufficient. Every speed record we break proves the previous record was not fast enough. Where does it stop? When we run out of war, I suggested. He smiled without humor. Or when we run out of pilots. We sat in silence for a while. Then Jeffrey spoke again. I have a friend, he said, David Hayes, flight lieutenant. We trained together. He is flying combat missions right now. Spitfire Mark 9, 404 miles per hour. Not the fastest thing we have tested, not even close. But it is what they gave him, and he flies it brilliantly. He paused. David writes to me sometimes. He tells me about the missions, the close calls, the friends he has lost. And I sit here testing aircraft that are faster, better, more advanced, and I think about how David will never get to fly them. How most of the pilots who actually need the improvements we are documenting will never benefit from them, because by the time these aircraft are ready for production, the war will be over or they will be dead. I did not know what to say to that. It was true. The gap between development and deployment was enormous. An aircraft we tested today might not reach frontline squadrons for 18 months. By then, everything could have changed. Do you think your Mustang is the fastest? Jeffrey asked, changing the subject slightly. I had been learning to be careful with that kind of question. Fastest under what conditions? Jeffrey smiled. Good answer. Learning to think like a test pilot. Let us make it simple. Maximum level flight speed. Any altitude you choose. Do you think the P-51 holds the record? I thought about the numbers I had seen. 437 at 25,000. Maybe, I said. Probably. Want to bet on it? Jeffrey asked. What kind of bet? If the P-51 ends up being the fastest fighter we test, I will buy you a bottle of the finest American bourbon I can find in England. If it is not you, buy me a bottle of single malt scotch. Deal? I shook his hand. Deal. We had no idea sitting there in the August twilight how many aircraft we would end up testing, how fast some of them would be, how much everything we thought we understood about speed was about to change. We had no idea that less than 2 years later, Jeffrey would fly an aircraft called Spiteful at 483 miles per hour and then collapse crying on the tarmac because he had just set a record that would never matter to anyone but us. All we knew that evening was that we had made a bet and we were both confident we would win. September 1943 came with rain and cold winds that swept across the Wiltshire countryside, turning the grass fields around Boscombe down dark and wet. The weather did not stop the testing. Nothing stopped the testing. I had been at the facility for 2 months. In that time, I had flown 11 different aircraft types, logged over 60 hours in British machines, and filled 3 notebooks with technical observations. I was learning to think differently about flying. Not as survival, not as combat, but as measurement. Every flight was data. Every maneuver was a test of theory against reality. Jeffrey and I had developed a routine. We would review the test schedule each morning over breakfast, discuss the objectives, predict the outcomes. He was always optimistic about the Spitfire variants. I remained quietly confident about American engineering. Our bet hung between us like a friendly challenge. On September 14th, the routine changed. I arrived at the morning briefing to find Wing Commander Donaldson standing at the front of the room with a new face beside him. The stranger was tall, maybe 6'2", with an athletic build and the kind of easy confidence that suggested he had earned his reputation the hard way. He wore flight coveralls with a name tag I could not quite read from my seat. Gentleman, Donaldson said, we have a new aircraft to test. Hawker Typhoon Mark 1B, powered by a Napier Sabre, 2B engine with a 4-blade propeller. This is Squadron Leader Roger Sinclair. He has been flying Typhoons operationally and will be conducting the initial test flights. Sinclair nodded to the room. Most of us had heard of the Typhoon. It had a reputation as a ground attack aircraft brutally effective against German armor and trains, but not particularly elegant. Not a dogfighter, not a speed demon, just a workhorse. The test objective is straightforward. Donaldson continued, maximum level flight speed at various altitudes. We will start at 15,000 feet and work our way up to 20,000. Captain Reynolds, Squadron Leader Mitchell, you will observe and document. After the briefing, Jeffrey and I walked out to the flight line together. The Typhoon sat on the tarmac, massive and aggressive looking. It did not have the graceful lines of a Spitfire or the sleek profile of a Mustang. It looked like what it was built to be, a weapon. Not much to look at, Jeffrey said. Gets the job done, I replied. We will see, Jeffrey said. My money is still on the Spitfire. The first test run was scheduled for early afternoon, assuming the weather held. Jeffrey and I spent the morning reviewing performance specifications, trying to predict what the Typhoon would actually achieve versus what the designers claimed it could achieve. The gap between theory and practice was often significant. At 1 o'clock, the clouds broke enough to create a window of acceptable visibility. Sinclair climbed into the Typhoon, ran through his pre-flight checks, and taxied to the runway. The Sabre engine had a distinctive sound, deeper and rougher than the smooth Merlin growl we were used to. He took off smoothly despite the aircraft's weight. We watched from the observation tower as he climbed to 15,000 feet, leveled off, and began the speed run. The radio crackled. Boscombe Tower, this is Typhoon Alpha. Beginning first run, altitude 15,000. Roger, Typhoon Alpha. We have you. We watched, waited. Timing a speed run from the ground was mostly about patience. The pilot had to accelerate to maximum sustainable speed, hold it steady for at least 30 seconds, confirm the reading, then report. Sinclair's voice came back. Boscombe Tower speed reading 392 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. Jeffrey wrote it down. Not bad, he said. But wait until we get to 20,000. The second run was at 17,500 feet, 403 miles per hour. The third run was at 19,000 feet, 409 miles per hour. The final run was at 20,000 feet. We waited for the call. When it came, Sinclair's voice had changed slightly. Less routine, more focused. Boscombe Tower speed reading 412 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. Repeat 412 at 19,000. I looked at Jeffrey. He had stopped writing. He was staring at the notepad where he had recorded the Spitfire Mark IX's performance from our flight 3 weeks earlier. 404 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. The Typhoon, a ground attack aircraft, a bus with wings, as Jeffrey had called it, had just flown 8 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire at a lower altitude. That cannot be right, Jeffrey said quietly. Donaldson was standing beside us. He had heard the call. Check the instruments, he said into the radio. Confirm calibration. A pause. Then Sinclair's voice. Instruments verified, sir. Reading is accurate. Donaldson looked at Jeffrey. The Typhoon is faster than the Mark IX, he said. Not by much, but faster. Jeffrey did not respond. He was still staring at his notes as if he could change the numbers by looking at them hard enough. I felt something shift in the room. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Spitfire was the icon, the legend, the aircraft that had saved Britain. The Typhoon was supposed to be the ugly cousin, effective but forgettable. Bring him in, Donaldson said. When Sinclair landed and taxied back to the hangar, we were waiting. He climbed out of the cockpit looking pleased but not surprised. Well, Donaldson asked. She is fast, Sinclair said. Faster than most people give her credit for. The Sabre engine at mid-altitude, properly configured, it delivers. Not the prettiest bird, but honest. No wasted energy. Donaldson turned to Jeffrey and me. This is the lesson, gentlemen. Beauty and speed are not the same thing. Reputation and performance are not the same thing. The Typhoon has been underestimated because it does not look like a racer. But drag is drag, power is power, and physics does not care about aesthetics. Jeffrey was quiet the rest of the day. That evening, I found him in the mess hall, sitting alone with a cup of tea that had gone cold. You all right, I asked. He looked up. I have been flying Spitfires for 3 years, he said. I truly believed that they were the best fighters in the world. Fastest, most maneuverable, most reliable. And now a Typhoon, a bloody Typhoon, beats the Mark IX in level flight. It is only 8 miles per hour, I said. He shook his head. It is not about the number. It is about what the number means. If the Typhoon is faster than the Spitfire, what else am I wrong about? I did not have an answer for that. The Typhoon results changed something in Jeffrey. He became more careful, more questioning. He stopped defending the Spitfire automatically and started asking harder questions about performance claims. It was like watching someone lose religion, not in a dramatic crisis of faith, but in a slow erosion of certainty. For me, the Typhoon was a wake-up call of a different kind. I had assumed American fighters would dominate any objective comparison. The Mustang, the Thunderbolt, the Lightning we built us, them bigger, more powerful, more advanced. Or so I thought. But the Typhoon was not American. It was British. And it was faster than my beloved Mustang at certain altitudes. Not by much, but faster. The gap was closing. In late September, a new face appeared at Boscombe Down. Lieutenant Robert Chen, United States Army Air Forces, but not a pilot. He was an engineer, mid-20s, compact build, dark hair and eyes that suggested Asian heritage. He had come from Wright Field in Ohio, where the Americans did their own aircraft testing and development. Chen was a propulsion specialist. He understood engines in a way that most pilots, including me, did not. He could look at a performance chart and tell you not just what the numbers meant, but why they were what they were. Thermodynamics, compression ratios, fuel mixture, propeller pitch, all the invisible machinery that turned combustion into speed. I met him his first day in the engineering office where he was reviewing Typhoon test data. He looked up when I entered, offered his hand. "Captain Reynolds," he said. "Bobby Chen, good to meet you." His accent was pure American Midwest flat with no trace of wherever his family had originally come from. I shook his hand. "Welcome to Boscombe Down," I said. "How are you finding it?" "Impressive," he said. "Your testing protocols are more rigorous than ours, more systematic. We could learn a lot." Over the next few weeks, I got to know Bobby Chen. He was brilliant, quiet, methodical. He approached every problem like a puzzle that could be solved with enough data and analysis. And he was treated by the British engineers and pilots with a respect I had not expected. Back home, Chen told me one evening, people see the face before they see the credentials. I am Chinese, so I must be good at laundry or railroads. Here they only care if I understand Merlin engine performance curves. He said it matter-of-factly without bitterness, but I heard the truth underneath. The British were not perfect, but in this place at this time they cared about competence more than background. It was one of the things we were supposed to be fighting for. Merit over prejudice, ability over ancestry. Chen was fascinated by the Typhoon results. He spent days analyzing the data, running calculations, building models. Finally, he called Jeffrey and me into his office. "I think I understand it," he said, pointing to a graph he had drawn. "The Typhoon is fast because of its altitude, band optimization. Look here. At 15,000 to 20,000 feet, the Sabre engine maintains power output better than the Merlin. Less efficiency loss in the mid-altitude range. The Spitfire is optimized for higher altitudes where the Merlin supercharger characteristics give it an advantage. But in practical combat, most engagements happen at mid-altitude. The Typhoon is fast where fast actually matters." Jeffrey studied the graph. "So the Spitfire is not slow," he said. "It is just fast in the wrong place." "For most combat scenarios, yes," Chen said. "The Typhoon's speed at 19,000 feet is more operationally relevant than the Spitfire's speed at 21,000. It was a small distinction, but it mattered. Speed was not absolute. It was contextual. An aircraft could be theoretically superior and practically inferior, depending on where and how it was used. "This will get worse," Jeffrey said quietly. Chen looked at him. "What do you mean?" Jeffrey gestured at the stacks of paperwork on Chen's desk. "All these new variants we are testing, upgraded engines, modified wings, refined aerodynamics. Every improvement proves the previous model was insufficient. How many more aircraft are going to be faster than the Spitfire?" Chen did not answer. He did not need to. We all knew. December 1943 brought snow and a new aircraft that would change everything we thought we understood about speed. The de Havilland Mosquito, Night Fighter Mark 30, arrived on a gray Monday morning, towed into a hangar like a secret. It was beautiful in an unexpected way. Twin engines, wooden construction, sleek lines despite its size. But it was a night fighter loaded with radar equipment and extra fuel tanks. Everyone assumed it would be heavy, slow, optimized for endurance rather than speed. The test pilot assigned to the Mosquito was not one of the regular squadron leaders. It was a woman. Flight Officer Patricia Walsh, Air Transport Auxiliary. The ATA ferried aircraft from factories to airfields, and some of their pilots had logged more hours in more aircraft types than most combat veterans. But seeing a woman climb into a fighter at Boscombe Down was still unusual enough to draw stares. Walsh was 40-ish, calm professional. She reviewed the test plan with Donaldson, asked a few technical questions, then walked out to the Mosquito without ceremony. Jeffrey and I were in the observation tower when she took off. The twin Merlins had a different sound than the single-engine fighters, more complex layered. "What are we expecting?" I asked. Chen had run the numbers. "Given the weight and drag profile, 380, maybe 390 at altitude," he said. "It is fast for a night fighter. Not fast compared to day fighters." The Mosquito climbed smoothly. Walsh reported reaching 26,500 feet, leveled off, began the speed run. We waited. When her voice came over the radio, there was a note of surprise in it. "Boscombe Tower initial reading is 420 miles per hour at 26,500 feet. requesting confirmation on instrument calibration. Donaldson leaned into the microphone. Calibration verified this morning. Reading is accurate. Continue test. Another pause. Then Walsh again. Boscombe Tower sustained speed 424 miles per hour at 26,500. Handling is excellent. Aircraft is stable. Jeffrey stood up from his chair. That is not possible, he said. Chen was frantically checking his calculations. I had the weight wrong, he muttered, or the drag coefficient. Something is wrong. Or, Donaldson said calmly, the Mosquito is simply faster than expected. It is a night fighter, Jeffrey said. Wood construction, radar equipment, extra fuel. It cannot be faster than the Spitfire. But it was. When Walsh landed, the entire engineering team converged on the aircraft. They checked every instrument, verified every reading, reran every calculation. The data was solid. The de Havilland Mosquito Night Fighter Mark 30 could sustain 424 miles per hour in level flight at 26,500 feet. That was 20 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire Mark 9. It was faster than the Typhoon. It was faster than everyday fighter we had tested, except the very latest Spitfire variants with Griffin engines. A wooden night fighter had just beaten almost every frontline combat fighter in Britain's inventory. Jeffrey sat in the hangar that evening staring at the Mosquito. I found him there after dinner. I was wrong about everything he said. I thought the Spitfire was the pinnacle. I thought night fighters were slow. I thought wood construction meant compromise. All of it wrong. You were not wrong, I said. You just did not have all the data yet. He shook his head. This is what Teddy has been trying to teach us. Speed is not about what an aircraft looks like or what role it fills. It is about clean design and efficient power delivery and minimal drag. The Mosquito is fast because every surface is optimized. No wasted energy, no compromises. He stood up still, looking at the aircraft. How many more surprises are waiting, he asked. How many more assumptions are going to be proven wrong? I thought about the bet we had made in August. P-51 versus Spitfire for fastest fighter. Neither of us had considered that the winner might be something else entirely. The winter of 1943 and early 1944 was a blur of testing. New aircraft arrived regularly. Variants, prototypes captured enemy machines. We flew them all, documented everything, built a database of performance that grew larger every week. In February 1944, a Spitfire arrived that made Jeffrey go quiet when he first saw it. Mark 14, powered by a Rolls-Royce Griffin engine instead of the familiar Merlin. The Griffin was bigger, more powerful, a completely different animal. This is it, Jeffrey said when they rolled it out of the hangar. This is the evolution. The Griffin engine produced 49% more horsepower than the Merlin. On paper, it should have made the Spitfire significantly faster. But paper and reality were often different. Jeffrey insisted on being the test pilot. Donaldson approved. I watched from the tower as he took off, climbed to 24,500 feet, and began the speed run. When he reported the results, there was something in his voice I had not heard before. Not quite pride, not quite sadness. Something complicated. Boscombe Tower speed confirmed. 449 miles per hour at 24,500 feet. I wrote it down, 449 miles per hour. That was 45 miles per hour faster than the Mark 9. It was faster than the Typhoon, faster than the Mosquito, faster than anything we had tested. When Jeffrey landed, he sat in the cockpit for a long time before climbing out. I met him on the tarmac. Well, I asked. He pulled off his helmet. It is fast, he said, bloody fast, but it is not the same airplane anymore. What do you mean? He looked back at the Mark 14. The Spitfire I flew during the Battle of Britain, the one I learned on, the one I loved, that aircraft is gone. This thing has the same name, the same basic shape, but it feels completely different. Heavier, more powerful, less forgiving. He started walking toward the hangar. The Spitfire I knew is dead, he said. This is its replacement. Faster, stronger, better in almost every measurable way. And I hate that it makes me sad. I understood what he meant. Progress required leaving things behind. The Spitfire Mark 14 was superior to the Mark 9 in almost every metric. But superiority and love were not the same thing. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. Testing at Boscombe Down did not stop, but it slowed. Many of the pilots were temporarily reassigned to support operations. The entire facility operated under a different kind of tension. This was it, the beginning of the end, or the beginning of a disaster. Nobody knew which. Jeffrey's friend David Hayes was flying combat missions over the beaches. Spitfire Mark 9, the 404 miles per hour variant that we had tested and documented and knew was not the fastest but was good enough where it mattered. On June 10th, Jeffrey received a letter. I was with him in the mess hall when he opened it. I watched his face change as he read, saw the color drain, saw his hands start to shake. What is it? I asked. He could not speak. He handed me the letter. It was from David Hayes' squadron commander. David had been killed on June 7th, the day after D-Day during combat air patrol over the beachhead. His Spitfire had taken anti-aircraft fire, caught fire, and gone down into the channel. There were no survivors. Attached to the commander's letter was a second envelope, David's handwriting on the outside. For Jeffrey Mitchell, to be opened in the event of my death. Jeffrey opened it with shaking hands. The letter was short. David had written it before D-Day, knowing he might not come back. It talked about the Spitfire Mark 9, about how it was a good aircraft, fast enough, maneuverable enough, strong enough. It talked about how 404 miles per hour was plenty of speed when you were trying to stay alive and keep your mates alive. The last paragraph made Jeffrey break down completely. I know you are testing faster aircraft, David had written. Better aircraft. Aircraft I will probably never get to fly. That is all right. The Mark 9 is enough. It has kept me alive this long. If it does not keep me alive through tomorrow, that is not the Spitfire's fault. It is just war. Tell the engineers at Boscombe Down that we do not need faster. We just need more of what works. And tell Jim Reynolds that the Americans make good fighters too. See you after the war, David. Jeffrey cried for an hour. I sat with him saying nothing because there was nothing to say. We were testing aircraft that could fly 449 miles per hour while men were dying in aircraft that could only do 404. The gap between development and deployment was measured in months and years. The gap between life and death was measured in seconds. After that day, everything changed for Jeffrey. He still flew the test missions. He still documented the performance, but he did it differently. With a kind of quiet intensity that has suggested he was doing it for David, for all the pilots who would never get to fly the faster aircraft we were developing. When we went back to testing in July, there was a new Spitfire variant waiting. The Mark 21 with a Griffin engine and further aerodynamic refinements. Jeffrey flew it to 26,000 feet and reported 454 miles per hour in a level flight. Faster than the Mark 14. Faster than the Mosquito. The fastest Spitfire ever built. When he landed, I asked him how it felt. Like it came too late, he said. We tested the Hawker Tempest Mark II in late summer, 442 miles per hour at 15,200 feet. Fast where combat actually happened, just as Bobby Chen had predicted. We tested the Westland Welkin in October, a high-altitude specialist that only did 385 miles per hour, but did it at 26,000 feet, where most other fighters struggled to maintain power. Every aircraft taught us something. Every test flight added data to our growing understanding of what made fighters fast. And every number we recorded felt like documentation of a world that was ending. By November 1944, Germany was clearly losing. The war would be over within months. Jets were appearing, making everything we had tested obsolete before it even reached production. And then in December, Donaldson called us into his office and told us about two new aircraft that were coming. The Hawker Sea Fury, he said, 460 miles per hour projected, and the de Havilland Hornet, twin-engine, similar concept to the Mosquito, but lighter, cleaner. Projected speed 470 plus. Jeffrey and I looked at each other. We were running out of war, but the aircraft kept getting faster. And there was one more, Donaldson said, Supermarine Spiteful, complete redesign, new wing, new everything. Not really a Spitfire anymore, despite the name. Projected maximum speed 480 plus. When Jeffrey asked, February or March next year, Donaldson said, you will be the test pilot squadron leader, if you want it. Jeffrey nodded slowly. I want it. That night he found me in the mess hall. I think the Spiteful is going to be the fastest, he said. I think it is going to break every record we have set. Probably, I agreed. He looked tired, older than his 22 years. And it will not matter, he said, because by the time it is ready for production, the war will be over. We are building the fastest fighters that will never fight. Maybe that is the victory, I said. The war ending before we need them. He smiled without humor. Then why does it feel like failure? I did not have an answer for that either. January 1945 came with bitter cold and news from the front that made it clear the war was ending. The Germans were in retreat on all fronts. Their jet fighters appeared sporadically but could not change the outcome. The Third Reich was collapsing. At Boscombe Down, we kept testing. The Hawker Sea Fury arrived on a transport truck in mid-January, still in the factory primer, not yet painted in operational colors. It looked aggressive, purposeful, like something designed by men who had learned every lesson the war could teach. Jeffrey was assigned as test pilot. I watched him walk around the aircraft that first morning, studying every rivet, every panel line, every surface. He had become meticulous about pre-flight inspections, almost obsessive. Since David's death, he trusted nothing to chance. What do you think I asked? He ran a hand along the wing. It is refined, he said, not revolutionary, just everything done right, every surface optimized, no wasted energy anywhere. The test flight was scheduled for January 22nd. Clear skies, light winds, perfect conditions. Jeffrey climbed into the cockpit at 0900 hours and taxied to the runway. The engine note was smooth, powerful, confident. He took off and climbed to 18,000 feet. The target altitude. Not stratospheric like some of the high-altitude fighters, but practical. The altitude where real combat happened most often. Bobby Chen and I were in the observation tower. Chen had his slide rule out constantly, calculating, checking predictions against reality. Jeffrey's voice came over the radio. Boscombe Tower beginning the speed run at 8,000 feet. We waited. I had learned to be patient during these moments. Speed runs took time. The pilot had to stabilize at altitude push to maximum sustainable power. Hold it steady, verify the instruments, confirm the reading. 2 minutes passed, then Jeffrey's voice again. Boscombe Tower speed reading 460 miles per hour at 8,000 feet. Confirm 460 at 8,000. Chen looked up from his calculations. That is faster than the Spitfire Mark 21, he said quietly. I wrote it down, 460 miles per hour, 18,000 feet. The Hawker Sea Fury, an aircraft that would not enter service until after the war ended, had just beaten the fastest operational Spitfire by 6 miles per hour. When Jeffrey landed, he seemed calm, not excited, not disappointed, just focused. Well, Donaldson asked. Jeffrey pulled off his helmet. It is everything it should be, he said. Fast, stable, honest, through the air. The kind of aircraft you would want if the war lasted another 2 years. But it will not, Donaldson said. No, Sir Jeffrey agreed. It will not. We stood there on this tarmac, 3 men looking at an aircraft that represented the absolute peak of piston engine fighter refinement, knowing it would never fire a shot in anger. The de Havilland Hornet arrived in early February, and it was beautiful. Twin Merlin engines, but mounted in a fuselage so clean, so elegantly streamlined, that it looked like it was moving even sitting still on the ground. This one is special, Donaldson told us during the briefing. Twin engine power with single engine drag characteristics. If the performance matches the design, it will be the fastest twin we have ever tested. Jeffrey studied the technical drawings. The fuselage is incredibly narrow, he said. How did they fit 2 pilots in there? They did not, Donaldson said. Single seat. All that power, all that fuel capacity for 1 pilot. The first test flight was scheduled for February 9th. Jeffrey insisted on flying it himself. I could see something in his eyes. He wanted this one. Wanted to know what it felt like to fly the fastest twin-engine fighter in the world. He took off smoothly despite the aircraft's weight. 2 Merlins pulling together created a sound that was both familiar and strange. Like a Spitfire, but deeper, more complex. The test altitude was 22,000 feet, high enough to stress the engines, low enough to maintain stable atmospheric conditions. I watched from the ground as the Hornet climbed a silver speck against gray clouds. Bobby Chen was beside me, timing the climb rate, calculating performance in real time. He is fast, Chen said. Faster than anything should be with that much weight. Jeffrey's voice crackled over the radio. Boscombe Tower level at 2,000 feet. Beginning speed run. The wait felt longer this time. I realized I was holding my breath. Boscombe Tower speed reading 472 miles per hour at 2,000 feet. Repeat 472 at 2,000. Chen dropped his slide rule. That is impossible, he said. But it was not impossible. It was real. 472 miles per hour. Faster than the Sea Fury. Faster than every Spitfire variant. Faster than the Typhoon, the Tempest, the Mosquito. A twin-engine fighter had just become the second fastest aircraft we had ever tested at Boscombe Down. Jeffrey brought it in for landing. The approach was smooth, professional. He touched down softly and taxied back to the hangar. When he climbed out, I was waiting. That was incredible, I said. He looked shaken. It was like flying a bullet, he said. All that power in the airframe just cuts through the air like there is nothing there. No drag, no resistance, just speed. We walked back toward the operations building. Jeffrey was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. The Spiteful is going to be faster, is it not? Probably, I said. And it will not matter any more than the Hornet matters. Any more than the Sea Fury matters. We are documenting the end gym. Recording what we could have built if we had another year. Maybe, I said, or maybe we are proving that peace came at the right time. For we needed these. He did not answer. March 1945 brought the first hints of spring and the last aircraft we would test during the war. The Supermarine Spiteful arrived on March 1st covered in a tarp, transported under guard. When they pulled the tarp off, I heard Jeffrey draw a sharp breath. It looked like a Spitfire the way a wolf looks like a deep, similar, related, but fundamentally different. The wings were wrong. Not the familiar elliptical curves, but something sharper, more modern. The entire airframe seemed tighter, meaner, optimized for one purpose: speed. Donaldson gathered us for the technical briefing. The Spiteful represents a complete departure from Spitfire design philosophy, he said. New laminar flow wing, extensive drag reduction throughout. Griffin engine pushed to maximum sustainable output. Projected maximum speed is 480 plus. He looked at Jeffrey. You are chief test pilot for this program, squadron leader. First flight is scheduled for March 15th, weather permitting. Jeffrey nodded. Understood, sir. Over the next 2 weeks, Jeffrey prepared obsessively. He studied every technical drawing, every performance specification, every wind tunnel test result. He spent hours in the cockpit while the aircraft was still grounded, learning the feel of the controls, the position of every instrument, the sight lines through the canopy. Bobby Chen ran simulation after simulation trying to predict exact performance. His best estimate was 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. If I am right, Chen said this will be the fastest piston engine fighter ever built by any nation during the war. What if you are wrong, I asked. Then it will be close, he said, but I do not think I am wrong. The night before the test flight, I found Jeffrey in the hangar, sitting on the wing of the Spiteful, staring at nothing. You ready, I asked. He looked at me. David will never know about this, he said. None of them will. All the pilots who died flying Spitfire, Mark 5s and Mark 9s, they will never know. We got it to 480 plus. Does that bother you? It bothers me that they died, I said. The speed does not change that. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He climbed down from the wing. I keep thinking, he said, about what this aircraft represents. It is called Spiteful, but it is not really a Spitfire. The Spitfire, everyone loves the one that won the Battle of Britain. That aircraft topped out at 370 miles per hour. This thing will do 113 miles per hour faster. That is not evolution. That is replacement. Maybe replacement is not failure, I said. Maybe it is success. The Spitfire did its job so well that we had time to build something better. Jeffrey smiled sadly. You are a better man than me, Jim. You find hope in everything. Not hope, I said, just perspective. We stood there in the quiet hangar looking at the fastest fighter Britain would ever build, and I realized that no matter what happened tomorrow, something would end. Either the aircraft would fail to meet expectations, improve the limits of piston technology, or it would succeed, and prove those limits were higher than anyone expected. Either way, we would know, and knowing would change things. March 15th, 1945 dawned clear and cold. Perfect flying weather. No clouds or light winds, visibility unlimited. I arrived at the flight line at 0600 to find Jeffrey already there doing his pre-flight walk-around. He had dark circles under his eyes. I doubted he had slept. Donaldson arrived at 0630 with the full engineering team. Bobby Chen carried 3 notebooks and enough calculating equipment to run a university mathematics department. The briefing was short: climb to 21,000 feet, level off, accelerate to maximum sustainable speed, hold for minimum 30 seconds, report, return to base. Simple, clinical, like every other test flight we had conducted. Except this one mattered more. This was the end of the line, the fastest we could go before jets made everything obsolete. Jeffrey climbed into the cockpit at 0700. He looked small in there, surrounded by instruments and machinery. He gave a thumbs up. The ground crew pulled the chocks. The Griffin engine started with a roar that shook the ground. Deeper than a Merlin, more aggressive. The propeller became a blur. Jeffrey taxied to the runway, got clearance, released brakes. The Spiteful accelerated faster than any fighter I had seen. It was airborne in less than 500 feet, climbing almost vertically, disappearing into the morning sky like it was eager to get away from Earth. We moved to the observation tower. Donaldson had binoculars. Chen had his slide rule ready. I had a notebook and a pen and a feeling in my stomach that I could not quite name. Jeffrey's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. Boscombe Tower passing through 10,000 feet. Climb rate is excellent. Aircraft handling is responsive. Roger, Jeffrey, Donaldson replied. Continue to assigned altitude. We waited, watched the sky. The Spiteful was too high to see now, just a theoretical point somewhere above the clouds. Boscombe Tower level at 1,000 feet. Beginning acceleration run. This was it. Everything we had been building toward for 2 years. Every test, every calculation, every lesson learned. All focused on this moment. 1 minute passed. The longest minute of my life. Then Jeffrey's voice again. Different this time. Quieter. Like he was afraid to say it too loud. Boscombe Tower airspeed reading 478 miles per hour. Still accelerating. Chen looked up from his notes. Almost there, he whispered. Another 30 seconds. Silence except for the faint crackle of the radio. Then Jeffrey again. Boscombe Tower speed confirmed. 483 miles per hour. Level flight. 1,000 feet. Repeat, 483 at 1,000. Donaldson closed his eyes. Chen put down his slide rule. I wrote the number in my notebook with a hand that shook slightly. 483 miles per hour. The fastest any Allied pilot had ever flown in level flight during the war. The absolute peak of piston engine technology. The end of an era documented and confirmed. Jeffrey, Donaldson said into the radio, well done. Bring her home. The landing was perfect. Textbook, Jeffrey touched down smoothly, rolled out, taxied back to the hangar. The ground crew was waiting. Chen was already running calculations. Donaldson was preparing the official report. I walked toward the aircraft as Jeffrey shut down the engine. The propeller spun slower, stopped. The canopy opened. Jeffrey pulled off his helmet. He sat there for a full minute, not moving, just staring straight ahead at nothing. Then he climbed out, stepped onto the wing, jumped down to the tarmac, took 3 steps, and collapsed to his knees crying. I ran to him. Jeff, what is wrong? He could not answer, could not speak, just knelt there on the cold concrete shoulders, shaking, tears running down his face. Donaldson reached us. Squadron leader, are you injured? Jeffrey shook his head. He finally found his voice broken and raw. I just flew the fastest fighter Britain will ever build, he said through tears. 483 miles per hour, faster than anything with a propeller we will ever make. And it is too late. The war is almost over. David will never know. None of them will know. We did it, and it does not matter. I knelt beside him, put a hand on his shoulder. It matters, I said. It matters because you did it, because we know what was possible. He looked at me with red eyes. Does any of this matter if nobody ever uses it? I did not have an answer, so I just stayed there with him while he cried for all the pilots who had died in slower aircraft, for all the improvements that came too late for the fastest fighter that would never fight. That evening, Jeffrey and I sat in the officers' mess with a bottle of bourbon that had somehow made it over from America. David's bourbon saved from his personal effects sent to Jeffrey after his death. We did not talk about the flight. We talked about David instead, about the Spitfire Mark 9 he had died in, about how 404 miles per hour had been fast enough for everything except keeping him alive. 2 months later, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. VE Day, victory in Europe. Boscombe down, celebrated like everywhere else. There was drinking, singing relief so profound it felt physical. The war in Europe was over. Jeffrey and I found ourselves outside the hangar where the Spiteful sat untouched, unneeded. We had a bottle of champagne Donaldson had given us. We sat on the wing and looked at the stars. Fastest fighter we ever built, Jeffrey said quietly, and it never fired a shot. Donaldson walked up carrying his own bottle. May I join you? We made room. The three of us sat on the wing of the fastest piston fighter in the world and drank champagne and tried to figure out what we had accomplished. I have been thinking about your question, Jeffrey Donaldson said, about whether any of this mattered. And Jeffrey asked. It mattered, Donaldson said, but not for the reason you think. The Spitfire Mark I won the Battle of Britain at 370 miles per hour. The Spiteful can do 483 and will never see combat. Which one saved Britain? The slow one, Jeffrey said. Wrong, Donaldson said. The right one at the right time. That is what David understood. Speed is just a number. Being there when needed is everything. He took a drink. This he gestured at the Spiteful. This is knowledge for peace. The Mark IX was survival for war. Both matter, just differently. I thought about that, about the list we had compiled. 10 British fighters ranked by speed. The Spiteful at number 1. The Spitfire Mark IX at number 9. But the Mark IX had won the war. The Spiteful had just won the speed record. What do we do with all this data, I asked. Donaldson smiled. We pass it on to the next generation. They will build jets and rockets and spacecraft. They will go faster than we can imagine. But it will all be built on what we learned here. How to measure performance honestly. How to test systematically. How to push limits safely. He stood up. The war is over, gentlemen. Our job is done. But the knowledge remains. June 1945. I received orders to return to the United States. My liaison assignment was complete. The war in the Pacific was still ongoing, but my role in it would not be at Boscombe Down. The night before I left, Jeffrey and I walked the flight line one last time. Past the hangar where the Spiteful sat, past the testing equipment and measurement tools, past 2 years of accumulated knowledge and experience. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten document, 10 aircraft listed in order, complete with speeds and altitudes and technical notes. The truth, he said, in case anyone ever asks. I looked at the list. Supermarine Spiteful at the top, 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. Westland Welkin at the bottom, 385 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. My P-51 Mustang was not on it. You were right, I said. I owe you a bottle of scotch. Jeffrey smiled. Keep the list instead. Tell the truth when the time is right. When will that be, I asked. When people are ready to hear that fast and best are not the same thing, he said. That might be never, but you should tell it anyway. We shook hands, then embraced. Write to me, he said. Every month, I promised. We kept that promise for 37 years. Every month a letter, updates on our lives, our families, our work. He stayed in aviation test flying jets, eventually retiring in the late 60s. I became a flight instructor, taught thousands of young pilots, never flew anything as fast as the Spiteful again. We never talked about that March morning in 1945. We did not need to. It was always there between us. The moment we pushed piston technology to its absolute limit and proved that limits are just numbers waiting to be exceeded. Return to 1985. My garage in Oklahoma. My son sitting across from me, holding the photograph, trying to understand. So the British built the fastest fighters, he says. Not us. In terms of pure speed, yes, I say. 10 British piston fighters were faster than anything we flew during the war. But son, that is not the point. Then what is the point? I show him the list Jeffrey gave me 40 years ago. The point is that we won together. The Spitfire is famous because it was there when Britain needed it, not because it was fastest. The P-51 is legendary because it could escort bombers to Berlin and back, not because it topped the speed charts. The fastest fighter, the Spiteful, nobody has heard of it because it came when the war was ending. I point to number 9 on the list. This one, Spitfire Mark 9, 404 miles per hour. My friend David died flying this. It was not the fastest, but it was what we had and it was enough. My son is quiet for a long time. You kept this secret for 40 years, he finally says. Why tell me now? Because Jeffrey died 3 years ago, I say. And he asked me to tell the truth. Not for recognition, for David and all the pilots who never got to see what we built. I hand him the photograph. That man in the center, I say. Jeffrey Mitchell. Best pilot I ever knew. He flew 483 miles per hour and cried because he knew it was too late to matter. He spent the rest of his life believing he had failed because that plane never fought. Did he fail, my son asks. No, I say. He succeeded. He proved what was possible. He showed that even when victory is certain, excellence still matters. Speed for its own sake does not win wars. But the pursuit of speed, the dedication to being better, that creates the foundation for everything that comes after. My son looks at the list again. Are you going to publish this? He asks. Maybe I say, or maybe I will just tell you and you can decide what to do with it. Your generation is building space shuttles and stealth fighters and things we never imagined. But you should know that once, not so long ago, men flew machines with propellers and pushed them to speeds nobody thought possible. And the fastest of those men was my friend Jeffrey, flying a British fighter called Spiteful at 483 miles per hour, crying because he knew the war was ending and his achievement would be forgotten. Do not let it be forgotten, my son says. I will not, I promise. This is the complete list. The truth Jeffrey Mitchell asked me to preserve. 1. Supermarine Spiteful F Mark 14, 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. The fastest, the loneliest. 2. De Havilland Hornet, 472 miles per hour at 22,000 feet. Twin-engine miracle. 3. Hawker Sea Fury, 460 miles per hour at 18,000 feet. Refined to perfection. 4. Supermarine Spitfire F Mark 21, 454 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Evolution of a legend. 5. Supermarine Spitfire Mark 14, 449 miles per hour at 24,500 feet. Griffin power. 6. Hawker Tempest Mark II, 442 miles per hour at 15,200 feet. Combat Altitude King. 7. De Havilland Mosquito NF Mark 30, 424 miles per hour at 26,500 feet. The Wooden Wonder. 8. Hawker Typhoon, 412 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. Brutal honesty. 9. Supermarine Spitfire LF Mark 9, 404 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. The one that mattered most. 10. Westland Welkin, 385 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Specialist. Purpose-built. These were the fastest British piston fighters of World War II. Jeffrey Mitchell flew most of them. He set the record in the Spiteful that will never be broken because piston fighters are history. But what he really did, what all of us did at Boscombe Down between 1943 and 1945, was prove that excellence matters even when victory is certain. That documentation creates knowledge. That honest measurement beats propaganda. That cooperation between allies produces better results than competition. The Americans did not build the fastest fighters. The British did, and that is fine. Because we fought together, we won together, and the only ranking that really matters is the one that says we were on the same side. I am Captain James Reynolds, United States Army Air Forces retired. I am 65 years old. I watched Jeffrey Mitchell cry after flying the fastest fighter ever built because it came too late to save David Hayes. This is their story. This is the truth. Speed is just altitude plus power plus drag divided by purpose. The numbers are in the records. The meaning is in what we did with them. And now you know.